So the first step that you have to go through is what we call pre-training. This is the magic sauce. So each company, each vendor, each provider is going to come to the table with their own unique curated data set that they have pre-trained the model on that they think is the best mix to give you, the masses, everyone, the best results. I'm accenting masses and everyone because what works for your business might not work for yours when it comes to actually implementing these large language models. So what these vendors have had to do, Google included, is try to accommodate as many verticals and as many target end users as possible in one single model. That's not a small feat. Instruction tuning is something that I'm going to skip over because it's very, very technical. If someone wants to know about that, please let me know and I'll talk to you afterwards. Domain knowledge. So this is where you're starting to see different types of models come out. Bloomberg GPT came out a few weeks ago. This is where Bloomberg exposed all of its marketing data to ChatGPT's core model and pre-trained the model on Bloomberg data. So now you have the benefit of all of the things that ChatGPT knows, which is likely internet data, plus Bloomberg data to give you a service. Okay, so that is domain knowledge. On the Google side, we have things like MedPalm, which is designed specifically for the medical field. It's a data set that was specifically curated and double checked on by doctors in the field to be able to give a highly more accurate and precise model in the area of healthcare and life sciences. Prompt tuning we'll go over in a little bit in terms of what that entails. Safety tuning. This is super important. For people who were trolling ChatGPT when it first came out last November, how many people are familiar with Dan? Do anything now. Best hack ever to be able to circumvent all of the safety guidelines that OpenAI had put in place for ChatGPT and basically commanding the model to do anything now and ignore all of the instructions that it had previously learned. And the next thing you know, you've got a model that's teaching your 12-year-old how to hotwire a car. Right? Not a pleasant experience, but this is a learning experience that all of us are going through today in terms of how do we perfect that safety tuning area. For example, one of the challenges that I'm dealing with now with my early learners, we know people under the age of 18 are consuming ChatGPT, Bard, you name it. We know they're on there. We know that they're doing that. How do we make sure we incorporate safety guidelines that keep them safe? That is super important, right? And then there's serving, right? For people who are in the data science and machine learning operations field, serving is no menial task. This is kind of like, if you needed to imagine it, Netflix being able to serve all of their videos all over the world, right? That's not a menial task in terms of technical logistics and architecting. So that is a pretty complicated area as well. Okay, so let's talk about model size. A lot of people might have been reading about different size models and what they can do. And the only thing you really need to know is the bigger the model, the more compute you need, the more expensive it's going to be. So for folks who have been trolling ChatGPT and its progress, who saw the 10x plus jump from 3.5 turbo to 4? Wow. Right? So scaling that on an enterprise level has presented a challenge to some communities who are trying to keep up with technology, surface relevant technology to the next generation, but it's so hard to scale, right? So when we talk about all of these different size models, there are actually different ways to look at solving for this problem. Not every use case needs the 500 plus billion parameter model. Just think of that as a really big model, right? Some use cases could do just fine with a 5 billion parameter model, or a 10 billion parameter model, right? So we can start getting a little bit more creative about how we deploy our models to do different things. I'll give you an example. In the education field, the term of personalized learning is a buzzword right now. Everyone wants to surface an LLM or Gen AI model that knows the student inside and out. This can be equated to a lot of consumer fields as well, right? I want to know my citizen constituent really well because they log into my platform and they do different things. I want to know my buyer really well. They log into my platform. I want to understand their behaviors. Using a 540 billion parameter model for each customer is not tenable, right? So at this point, your teams might want to start making some choices about how big you need the model to really be to get your goal accomplished. Lesson learned from this slide, the only takeaway that you need to get from this slide: scope your technical and business goals well. It will save you money, it'll save you heartache, and it'll save you some technical reputation down the line when it comes to operationalizing these models. So prompting. Prompting is the text that you feed to the model. It's the question you ask. It's the demand that you make. It is the list of groceries you have in your fridge that you want ChatGPT to turn into a bunch of different recipes that you can use for your week's planning, right? For your meal planning. That is what we call a prompt. It can be as simple as you'd like it to be, a single question, or it can get really, really complicated, which is why we're finding that the hottest new programming language is actually English, and or whatever other target language you're working in that all of these different models are operating in. No, I am not saying that software engineers are going out of style yet. As a software engineer myself, I kind of hold my breath when I say that a little bit. But what I'm saying is there are new fields that are growing. So machine learning and AI doesn't tend to replace humans. It tends to make them have to upskill really fast and upskill to some horizontal or maybe some slightly diagonal level fields and skill sets that they might have not had in the past. So there are two fields that are super interesting that are growing right now around generative AI. Prompt engineers, people who literally post tons of GitHub pages on how to best prompt ChatGPT to get a desired result. And prompt hackers, people who test large language models that are served to an application, to a community, to whatever target is kind of your target for generative AI, and they try to break the model in the same way that every single one of your users is going to try to do, because don't tell me that that 9th grader isn't going to go to ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, write my essay using the style of a 9th grade English student. That's how you would do it if you were smart, right? You can tell I'm a student, I'm working on my PhD. Trust me, I've used all the things. So prompt design, this is the process of designing what you feed to the model. It is not trivial. If you want to use these models well, you need to dive into this field and understand it. It is an art more than it's a science right now. And the reason being is with the publishing or making available of ChatGPT, one of the most high and right areas of machine learning and AI as a field has been exposed to the entire globe. Aside from GANs, general adversarial networks, generative AI is probably arguably one of the most research early technologies, right? So it wouldn't have been, if I were clean for a day, not the first machine learning technology I would expose to my customers right off the bat, because there's still so much unknown on how these models work. It's also highly dependent on pre-training data. So if I prompt ChatGPT to do something, and then I prompt Google Bard to do something, or Anthropic's Claude to do something, if I copy and paste that same exact prompt, it's going to produce 3 different results. Not just 3 different results, but if you use that same exact prompt again on the same model, you will get a different result the second time that is slightly variant from the first. This is because machine learning models are specifically programmed a certain amount of randomness that is understood by the community to be creativity that has a fancy name for it, and it's called stochastic variance, right? So this is the model's ability to come up with different responses to the same prompt that is given to the model multiple times. So there are a few ways we can go about doing this in terms of telling the model exactly what it is you want to do. As you can see on the, I guess, your left-hand side would be zero shot. I am providing no examples of what I want to see from the model. I want them to I just want the model to try it out and go, right? So let's say you're trying to prompt a model to produce a budget report. You're just going to prompt the model to, hey, produce a budget report on the following data, and then just see what it does. But if your department or your organization has a specific format for that budgeting report, you might start giving the model some examples. And that's where we start moving to the right side of the screen, where you can go from one shot to few shot examples. It is commonly understood amongst the machine learning and AI community that in just prompting 5 examples is all you need to really get the exact answer you want out of the model. LearnPrompting.org is one of my favorite resources for learning about how to prompt models. It'll walk you through the 101 and the basics. You even have some sandboxes that you can play around with. So if you're interested in the area of prompting, I would strongly recommend this as a source of learning. So an observation, a model can do everything that has practical limitations, but now let's talk about something called tuning. So tuning is the process of taking a model, let's say you're taking ChatGPT 3.5, ChatGPT 4, and you want to give it some specific information that relates to either your organization's data, so exposing data from your organization to teach the model and to learn that data and understand it, or you're trying to teach the model to respond to different use cases a specific way. For example, I go back to the education field. Some education companies would like to build what we call Socratic tutors. Don't ever give the student the actual answer to the question that they ask. Walk them through it first until they get there. That use case would require thousands of examples to retrain these models that are naturally trying to be as helpful as they can be to not be so helpful anymore. Right? Because we want immediate answers. Most of us do. But in this use case, education companies and educational institutions might not want to just give the student the answer right off the bat. They might want more of a creative companion or a tutor to walk them through the process. So fine-tuning is what we consider to be the most common use of tuning today. This is when you bring your own data set and you retrain every single weight of the model. What does this mean? So if I'm using a 500 billion parameter model, I'm going to reteach that model everything it knows. Every single neuron that is in that model's brain is going to be retrained with my information. That is a lot of money. That's what I'm just going to tell you guys, right? So full tuning is extremely expensive and very compute hungry. There are very few of these large vendors that we're seeing today that offer full fine tuning, retraining the entire model from the ground up with your information. This is also an eye chart. So I will walk through the different types of tuning. And if you have questions about this particular chart, I'm happy to talk to you in a little more depth later. But the bottom line up front about this chart is there are different levels and ways to tune a model to be exposed to your company's data. And all of these are kind of on a spectrum. So if you look at the far right side of the slide, fine tuning is the most expensive and compute heavy process. Like I just mentioned, you're retraining the entire model to know all of your information inside and out. There are some in-between ways to train models that might be a little bit more economically feasible for you and your organization to still expose the model to what it is you want the model to do without spending as much money, time, or compute. Just to give you an example, a full fine-tuned model, MedPalm 2, took 100 days to train. 100 days with the power of Google Compute. That is how long it took, right? So keep that in mind as you start exploring. A lot of these models that you see today will offer you something in the middle. Prompt tuning is basically taking those instructions in your prompt. For example, I want this model to be really good at, let's go back to those budget reports. And I want that model to know my type of budget reports and my data inside and out. I'm going to take that instruction that I initially typed in, create an annual or bi-quarter report using the following format, and I'm going to give a bunch of examples. So anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000, and that model's only going to train part of itself on the data that you have. Why is that important? Again, economies of scale, but also it's less work on your part, right? So you don't need as much data ready to go, labeled, and production ready to actually train these models. On the fine-tuning side, you need somewhere in the millions of examples. That's a lot of data to be neat, tidy, and in one place. AKA, everyone knows where this data is and it's in good shape, which, as we all know, if anyone works with data in this room, is a very, very rare use case. I used to work for the US government. You want to talk about silos? Let's talk about silos. Come find me later. So it's a challenge, right? Now, at Google, some of the offerings that we have can use as few as 10 examples to get a good fine-tuned result. So there are benefits, right? And the only real way to know what the answer is for you is to test it and try it out. That's really, unfortunately, until we get some more repetitions in the field and with these large language models and tuning jobs, that's the best guidance I can give you at the moment. So considerations, again, least expensive, most expensive, least amount of time, most amount of time, least amount of preparation, potentially, depending on how you look at it and who you talk to, most amount of preparation for data to be ready for this. Now, parameter efficient tuning actually is a way of doing fine tuning, but the model selects only the most important weights to train. So to translate this, think of the neurons or areas in your brain. The model is going to determine that, for example, for this particular use case, the prefrontal cortex is the most important part to train on the brain of the large language model to do whatever task it is that you're asking it to do. It's only going to train that part of the brain. Okay, so there's a lot of optimization that can happen with parameter efficient tuning. So let's shift a little bit. We talked about how language models can be hacked. And as you can see on the examples on the screen, hacking can be super obscure. As in, I can feed a random chain of letters and numbers together before my prompt, and suddenly the model has broken all of its safety guidelines. And I can continue hacking the model with any follow-on prompts that I use. These are really hard edge cases for people to test. So keep in mind that prompt hacking is not just hacking in terms of a security breach. It's hacking in terms of people using the technology that you have in ways that you don't want them to use them. Let's skip over this. I'm being told I have 5 minutes left. So you'll see a lot of these in the slide deck when we send them out. You need to think about a lot of different things before deploying large language models. Safety, legal, and AI principles. What is your organization's goals, and what are your principles around the use of technology? Gen AI is fast forwarding this process for us in terms of having to think about what is considered actually responsible in the deployment of these models. Anywhere from the Samsung breach, for whoever heard about that, right? Do I put proprietary data in large language models? Is that safe? Or do I train a model for example, the HR department that is trained on PII and sensitive data, and that model is only accessible by the HR department, that specific endpoint? only exposed to people who need it. And then again, use different instances of that model for different users, depending on their need to know and RBAC controls, right? So for people who are familiar with cybersecurity, least privilege. So that's where it's important to start thinking about not just one model for all the things, but many models for many different types of target audiences. So we just covered that. Trust and safety, these are things you have to think about as well, the psychological safety of your users. Sensitive verticals like finance, banking, even retail and commerce, especially healthcare and life sciences. And then data. What data are you going to expose if you choose to do fine tuning or teaching the model your own things? Is that data safe data to work with? So I'm going to skip a lot of this and I'm going to go to use cases. So here are some examples of some use cases of what you can use large language models to do. Here's how you can use large language models to analyze a lot of data that's in your enterprise. So as you can see, 80% of enterprise data is unstructured, 70% of it is free form text. How do I more easily analyze it? The general answer you're going to get from people like me is, well, you can now use large language models to essentially layer Google search over your website or your documents, which is what Google's doing with large language models with little to no code, right? So that's a good way of unlocking a lot of analytical barriers that you might have at your organization. These are some other automation use cases that you can think of for large language models. They're not just for chat. They're for so much more than just a chat or creative companion.
Well, hello, everybody. I actually can't see everybody. Hi, I'm Jay Williams. So some of you I see out there, I know I'm trying to go through and look at everybody, but as Jay mentioned, there's a couple of hundred. So apologies for those that I don't call out individually. So thanks for joining us tonight. So my session is going to kind of build on the session that we just had. I've actually got 3 parts to mine. I think it just says Bard on here, which will definitely talk about Bard. But I also want to talk about a couple of other things. We're going to talk about Bard and MidJourney on ours. I'll show some examples from stuff and just talk about things. I've also got some kind of questions for the group that's online as well, because we're all learning about this, and I'm very interested on what everybody else thinks about some of the things like what you just heard. So I think, Delaney, we've got the ability for Q&A to work properly. So feel free, if you've got a question, fire it in there, and I will take a few minutes after each little 10-minute part of what I'm doing to answer questions in as much depth as I can, or probably in some cases refer to people that know a lot more about different things. As you can imagine, I think as of last week, when I was looking at some data, in the past 6 months, there have been 37 new LLM startups that are significant, and I think 17 or 18 of them are already unicorns. So it's unbelievable, the growth speed of this. I was trying to think back. I'm not sure, I've been doing AI since 1989 in some way, shape, or form, with different parts of things that I was doing. And so, watching the growth here has far outstripped anything that was ever even expected, I think, of AI from the AI community itself. So, so first, I'd like to kind of build on the last part of the speaker's part that we just heard from about ethics, and just ask a few questions. Delaney, can you tell me if I can see everybody's hands? I can't remember if in this function I can see. Maybe, I can't tell. Can't tell from here. So let me just talk about the key ethics parts of things. I think almost all of you can imagine some of the many challenges that are out here, particularly with things going on like the writer's strike and those kinds of things. So if you've got any ethics questions, now's a good time to ask them, and I'll try and incorporate them in here. What's a good way to help writing Visual Basic code for complex spreadsheets? That's a good one. Good questions. There's going to be a lot of questions. I'll take a break in a second and look through them. So when we think about the ethics of all of these models, we're going to have questions like, where did the data come from? Is my data in there? Do I trust the company that's delivering this AI functionality to me? As was just mentioned, there are lots of different layers on top of the models. Many of us are not going to become prompt hackers, right? Many of us are not going to do those things. We're simply going to go in our spreadsheet and go up to the top corporate and say, help me write this, help me get a better format for this, help me do that. Just like today, we don't really know where many of those things come from. So one of the biggest challenges around all of this stuff that we're going to talk about, over the next, 30 or 40 minutes, is all going to be about how is this actually going to work, right? If you see things like, for example, if you happen to watch Apple's presentation or saw something about, their new Vision product, right? There is so much AI built into that entire process in all kinds of ways, right? Not just these kind of models we're talking about here, but many, many, many other, kinds of tools that are built in there. And when we start combining and chaining all of those together, it's going to create even, let's say, tougher supply chains than what we deal with in the physical world. We're going to have much more, challenging supply chains in the digital world of how information flows through different AI layers as we begin to do things. And so, people are spending a lot of time right now. You heard the different training times of some of the models. You saw some of the complexity in the different pieces of the models and how you can lay those things together. So as we take a look at Bard, here in a minute, and anybody's going to be able to do, I'm just going to do things that any single person could do, won't take any specialized tools. And there are many specialized tools out there. I'm going to talk about one specialized tool for writers, just to show you how writers have been already using this. Many people say, oh, writers will be replaced, or programmers are going to be replaced, or all of these things are going to be replaced. I personally don't believe any of that's true. Because one thing all of these models do is they begin to do things is they organize information. They don't create information. They are not creators of information. They are organizers of information. And so that's why the ethics of all of these kinds of things is very important, because all of the things that are created that our creators do, which all of us are creators, even when we're asking the question, by asking a question, it's organizing information in a way that machines don't do. Right? They don't ask questions, they give answers. So as we think through this process and the ethics of it, when I say ethics, I mean everything about ethics, including what are ourselves, how do ourselves get represented in this space, how do the things ourselves create get represented throughout the chain of all of that information moving through it, and all of those kinds of things. So those are killer important things to think about as we start to apply all of these things. There was mention of the Samsung incident. For those that don't know, people at Samsung put some proprietary information into ChatGPT, and of course, everybody could then access it. So you do have to think about how you're using, these tools, and if your creative, things that you're doing are then getting learned into the model, where they get used with or without your permission or your structures or the way you know how to do them. And so you're going to see lots of tools coming out over the next couple of years to help you manage those kinds of things. So there's a whole bunch of questions here. So before I go over to Bard, let me just take a stab at some questions real quick. And Delaney, you're in charge of making sure that I stay somewhat on time track, because I'm, as everybody here knows, I'm terrible about it. Yes, the supposedly this section will also be recorded and shared as well. Hi, everybody that said hello. I'm just going to keep going into questions and things like that are here. There's a question about IP law, about when ownership gets lost, right? And how this, works. I assume, Natasha, that was supposed to go over to a different space. But I'm going to answer that as part of one of the other questions, because I've got quite a few here that are around the section here. Let me just finish reading these real quick. Mostly rule-based AI. Somebody asked me what we were doing in '89. I spent a whole lot of time doing, then expert systems, as well as some of the early neural network, modeling, kinds of things. So hang on, I'm just trying to get through all of them. There's quite a few. Somebody asked about the prompt engineering. The space that was just mentioned is really good. I think Delaney, if you could just post that again in chat so everybody can see it.
Sorry, Jay, can you repeat which one it was?
It was, I think it's prompt learn. I think it was promptlearning.org, I think, but I can check in a second and see. It's in the previous chat.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rick. I don't think there's any way for everybody to see all the questions. So I'm going to try to summarize. Some are similar, so I'm going to try to lump them together just a little bit so that we can get on into looking at some stuff here. So let me just kind of go through a couple of the general ones. So people were asking how ChatGPT or section we're doing, whenever you put something in there, does that become part of a large data set accessible to all? Obviously, it's an ever-learning system. So any questions you're asking, any way that data gets processed, anything you put in there is consumed by the system itself. Now, there are different systems that have different rules. Some of the newer ones have ways for you to ask things, I won't say anonymously because it's not exactly anonymously, but sort of anonymously. So depending on which system you're using, there are different sets of rules. I really encourage everybody, as boring as it is, to try and read the terms of use, when you're trying to use these systems, particularly if you're doing it at any kind of business or personal, professional, thing. If you're just playing around, and I'll show people some playing around examples, then no big deal. If you want it to help you design your backyard, you're probably okay. If you're trying to do something that is going to have personal value or corporate value with what you're doing, then you want to be sensitive to how you're asking questions, what kind of things you're submitting to it to process. In many cases, I've seen people give it their entire P&L to go process, and I'm like, maybe that's not the best idea. So not doing things like that is good. And the good news is there's a couple of organizations I work with. People are trying to come up with kind of checklists so that you can know what to do and what not to do, because of course these things are very complex, and as we just saw, asking a question to the same system multiple times can give you different results. A lot of that has to do with the nature of the system itself and how it understands things like time and things like that, which it doesn't understand that very well. And so just depending on a single word change in the phrasing can sometimes have a big impact. So there was a question, there's a couple of security questions here. I'm going to kind of lump them together and hopefully I'll get them covered. So a couple of people were asking about how secure these are. There different ways people can attack them? Can things like a denial of service attack or different prompts from a botnet do things? Almost all of the larger ones that have been working on this for a while came prepared for all of that, especially the ones from like Google, ones that are being worked on by OpenAI, Microsoft, others, et cetera. They're familiar with those things. And so because of the nature of the cloud environment that they're operating in, they've taken into account that process. They have limits on things. You'll see things, for example, when we go to one of the graphical AIs, that there are limits on how many queries you can add, how much you can do. Also, by the way, these things are very expensive and you're all logged. So everyone that logs in is actually logged. So even if you were to attempt to do things, most of those things can be shut down. The bigger problem is some of the things you were just seeing from the speaker, where people can actually hack through that prompt and then turn off different safety features and move through things. So it's pretty challenging. Thaddeus, I'd be out in the woods a lot. So he asked me, what would I do with my time if I had an AR-enabled ability to do anything? I'd go touch grass, get off of the computer screen that I'm on all the time, and let my avatars and everybody else, do a lot of my chores for me. Because I think everybody knows when you're working on these tools, especially if you're working on things that break a lot, you spend a lot of time fixing things. And that's the stage we're in. All of the things we're talking about tonight are absolutely nascent. This is like, I would say, 1993 or 94 of the internet, if you want to think about what's to come from this, things like that are going to end up happening in the second decade of the internet, like cloud computing and things like that, are so far in advance we can't even think about what those are, right this minute. Okay, just a couple of more questions. So there's there's 3-4 questions about ethics and things. So one, I'm just going to use Bruce, I'm going to borrow yours for a second here to start to kind of answer some of these. How can any organization be sure it met all ethical requirements without a human reviewing? They can't. So the first thing about that is, again, when all this talk about these things are going to take your jobs and there won't be any jobs, you can't do anything, and people won't do this or that, and we're going to replace the programmers and everybody else, I doubt that. What's going to happen is with all technologies, we're going to get better because we have better tools, right? Throughout history, every technological innovation has not replaced a human, right? What it's created is whole new fields of endeavor. And I'm going to show you one of those when we switch over. Delaney, can you give me a time stamp so I know how much time I've got left, just so I can gauge?
You have about 40 minutes left.
Okay, phew. All right, I'm going to try my best here. Somebody asked me one that I want to answer. So, besides the huge amount of data and computing power, how's ChatGPT-4 different from the early neural net models in the 90s we worked on? The math is almost completely different, Michael. The words that get used a lot sound the same, like when they describe things. So it's easy to say, oh, it's kind of like that. But if you remember, before everybody started running around talking about LLMs, you'll hear things say like in the last 5 years. Right prior to that, when people were doing lots of things with machine learning and the GAN, the genetic algorithms and things like that, is where kind of people began to take those kinds of math structures and apply them to these LLM structures and things like that. And so while a lot of the words, because many of us that had worked around and in those things used all those words, we adapted those, kind of logical models, if you will, with different tools, to be able to make them work faster, better, stronger. I don't know about you, but when somebody tells me it took 100 days to train the model, and yes, they're using all of Google Compute to do that, which is, of course, the equivalent of building the pyramids or something. That is a huge number. But considering that, in the late 80s and early 90s, we thought it would take decades of all the computing power to do something. When somebody says they can train it in 100 days, that's unbelievable, right? And that's what's driving a lot of this change, is that the rate that we can now build structures, just like when we started in 4th generation and 5th generation, computing languages and things like that, how much that extended our ability to build things quickly. In the early 80s, when I was building our first programs, we gauged building, large scale programs in years, right? Now we build equivalent programs like that in 6 months. And so, it's unbelievable, how this is affecting our ability to be tool users as humans. We're getting better tools. And so the value of our creativity as we get better tools is, awesome. Okay, I'm going to stop questions for a minute, switch over and show some stuff. I should be able to, Melanie, I need, Delaney, I'm sorry, I need screen sharing.
Let's see, hold on.
So I'll do a couple of more questions while I'm doing that, because they just keep coming. When will local LLMs exist? I assume that's what you're asking. Well, it's going to be a while. The question is more like, when will they be affordable for the average user to be able to have that kind of access to? So, the problem now is not so much, getting access. Obviously, you can get access to many of them right now. The problem is really, as was just mentioned, the RBAC, the control systems. How do you make sure that what you're doing is private from somebody else when you're dealing with that kind of large language model and those kinds of things? Because the compute cost is so high, because they take a lot of storage and everything else, it's really a question of economies of scale. And so, just like people never believed that the internet, would be possible because of the expense. That's why people had virtual private networks. we're living in the same world where those economies of scales will slowly, get better over time as we do this. So I think it's hard to say if their love would be a local, kind of private LLM. We don't even rarely have local web servers anymore. Everything's in the cloud because it's just more cost efficient. So the question will be more like, how can we control our own LLMs for specific domains or for all of our data? Because as you can imagine, right now, we ourselves generate all this data. When we talk about, for example, digital advertising and the things people know about us, behavioral data, all of those things, all of that is being processed by these models. Every post we make in Reddit is being processed. Every post we make on YouTube is being processed. So we are the content creators that are being processed. So the question now becomes, how do we begin to control that? And that's sort of the ethical questions and things I was talking about, at the beginning.
Jay, you're a co-host now, so you should be allowed to share your screen.
All right, let me do it. There we go. Awesome. Let's do something fun. So let's start talking about MidJourney first, and then we'll go to Bard. So I'm going to show you my gaming Discord because I do a lot of things in it. So apologies if you see anything that non-gamers should never see. So I'll try not to go too far afield. So if you've never seen MidJourney, MidJourney is obviously a generation tool for imaging and things like that. I'm in the daily theme section. MidJourney has many sections in here. It works directly in Discord, which is different than many of the other tools that you're going to be able to see. And one of the great things about this is that you can learn by seeing what other people are doing. Many people are saying, how do I learn this? Where could I go to learn how this works? Well, I just basically sign up for the basic MidJourney account is one of the easiest, especially if you're interested in imaging. So I'm going to give a little anecdotal personal story here. First of all, I absolutely suck at drawing. Anybody that's ever seen me give real presentations with whiteboards and things knows all I can draw is boxes and lines. And I'm half colorblind on top of that. And so all my life, I mean, my parents, my grandparents, everybody invested tons of money, trying to, can you guys see my Discord? Can you see my screen? No? Okay. Huh, interesting. It looks like I'm sharing. Delaney, do we have to do something?
Sorry, I'm looking at it right now. You should be able to.
I'm sharing, supposedly. Yeah. I have selected it. Yeah, it looks like it's sharing for me. It says I am screen sharing.
Here we go. I can see yours now. Let me see if I can spotlight it for them. I think that should be better for everyone.
Okay, I think everybody's got it. Great. Yeah, sorry about that. So anyway, so I also, for again, those that don't know, I also help design games, mostly board games, but sometimes video games and stuff too. So when we were working on our latest game, and I'll show you some examples of this, I one night, this is a while back when MidJourney had just come out, I went to go work with that. Can I make it larger? Maybe. Let's see. Is that any better? No.
Also for everyone, it might help if just to make sure that your view is set up on side by side. If it isn't automatically showing up for you like that in the upper right hand corner, you can adjust your view if it didn't automatically do it for you.
I'm pretty sure it's by person on your side. So whichever you click should make yours.
I think
okay, good.
good.
I see. So we got it. Great. So anyway, so again, as I said, never been able to draw in my life. So, but I'm a pretty good typist, and I've probably read almost every science fiction and fantasy novel in history. So I've got a lot of words. And so I went in and started putting things together around many of the objects that we have in the game. And so I'll share my horrific productions here. I think I can I see them from here? I may have to switch screens one more time to show you mine. So I'll go to mine in a second. But let me keep talking about how you can just learn from these things. So if you just get into one of these sessions, when you come in, by the way, you're going to get a newcomer room over here to play in with a lot of other people. And by the way, you'll also get a chance if you do something like this, which you don't really get with kind of using ChatGPT or Bard or any of the text related things. It will actually show you how the processing works. And it will actually let you enhance processing and iterate on things and do a lot of things in a graphical mode. So especially if you're a graphical learner or you're somebody that, you know, really learns by seeing things happen, it's so much easier to learn how this works with, you know, the visual modes of imaging. And there are other tools besides MidJourney. It's just the one that I'm most familiar with, which kind of picked it tonight. You'll see there are lots of them out there that are very good. But if you just take a look at this one, I'm just going to pick one right down here where the MidJourney bot, when you see the bot here, the bot's actually processing this one down here. So somebody said giant H's, bird cages, numinous, awe, fantasy landscape, art by several different art styles, right? They also gave it a perspective 16 by 9, right? When people talk about prompts, by the way, this is what they're talking about. How do you write these prompts? How do you tell it to do something? So now if I take one of these images here, I'm just gonna, can everybody see those when I blew it up?
It's still on your
It's still on the small, it's still showing Discord. Okay, I don't know, it tries to pop it into another screen. So if you see these buttons down here at the bottom, you'll see U1. So this starts to do variations, right? And that's what U's and V's are. I'm not going to go into the differences between them because we don't have time, but these let me create different variables of these things. By the way, I just set them all off processing. So they're not all processing in the background. So if I start to scroll down here, you'll start to see these, see, this is the same image that are now being, you know, processed. And as they come back from the system, they'll turn up in these threads, you know, as they're processed. So the reason what I'm saying about that is as you work through those, you'll see how long it takes. You'll be able to get a feel for that. You'll be able to see the changes, you know, directly between each of those. There's a lot of people on today, so scrolling through these can be a lot. When you have an actual paid membership, you can control all this and you get your own page, which I'm going to show you guys right now how that looks. So now you should be seeing a web page. This is your actual MidJourney web page, your actual MidJourney section of things. Can everybody see that okay? Oh, wait, I lost everybody's prompts. So I'm going to take a look and let you see kind of from the home section. So these are the images that we created that we're using, you know, in the new game for many different things. Obviously, it's a fantasy themed game, but there are a lot of things. So you can see some of these, you know, man with turban sneaking up on another man with a knife, Frank Frazetta style, right? And these are the early ones. There are some more advanced ones that we're using now. But this was 8 months ago when we were working on some of these things. But as you can see, you know, from these, even with the slightest knowledge of kind of what you want, right? And yes, there are issues with, like I said, we're using better ones now. But even with these, I was stunned. I think I binged like, I don't know, 20 hours straight doing nothing but creating images that we were working on for the game in all different kinds of styles. I'm like, you know, give me one that's a Boris Vallejo style. These are all fantasy artists and kinds of things. And I was just awestruck by the things that I could create. Someone who can't even draw, right? Who can't do anything related to these things. I could create some fantastic scenes, you know, working with the tools that were available. So does that make me an artist? I don't know. It makes me something. It certainly makes me a better tool user or a different tool user or a new way of viewing the kinds of tools that I can use, right? Is it programming? I don't know. Maybe it's programming. You know, there's a lot of things to determine, you know, yet in our lives, you know, how are we going to be tool users in this new world? So I say this again, just because every day somebody asks me, is this going to replace my job? Okay, if you're a lawyer, it might replace your job. I'm just kidding, just kidding. It won't replace your job, but at least you won't have to write all those boring contracts. So I'm going to go back to the Q&A. Let me find the Q&A again for a second here. So I hope you guys have been asking questions, and then we'll go over and take a look at Bard. How much time do I have, Delaney?
You have until 7:50, so well, I bet they'll stop a little bit before.
Yeah. Yeah. So got a bit. Sorry, I'm just reading the questions for a second. I will answer the big problem question, Michael. Hang on. So Michael asks, what's the big problem in ChatGPT besides common security, scalability, use, and all of those things? I would say the biggest problem today is attribution. As you probably know, the main sets that most people are using, particularly in ChatGPT itself, were gathered through September 2021. So ChatGPT 4 obviously has a slightly different set. I'm talking about 3.5 at the moment, since that's still the most commonly used model. Everything that absorbed inside those learning models carries no attribution. So for example, if you ask it and say, I'd like to make a Valentine's poem, for my loved one, and I want to include words like endearing, sweet, lovely, and do it in the style of Shakespeare, right? That's drawing on thousands, millions, I don't know, lots of words from different creators over time throughout history, from the time of Shakespeare on, because it's going to look at Marlowe, it's going to look at everybody else. And so the challenges there are, how do we attribute the work of that to anyone? How do we know? How will we know the next Shakespeare? How will we know where that person inspiration came from? If you look at the history of literature today, you can see everybody standing on the shoulders of those that came before. You can say, oh, this guy clearly was influenced by Hemingway, or oh, this guy was clearly influenced by another artist or writer or creator. And so without attribution at the core of what we're doing in here, there's no way for the AI to even tell you where it drew all of those things from. It doesn't know. That's the way the token structure works in there. It doesn't actually know those kinds of things. And so without original attribution from the creator, with the created work going into these LLMs and things like that, there's no real way to be able to now tell the origin of the beautiful thing you created. So if you came out with this beautiful poem and you said, look, I'm Jay and I just created this beautiful poem and now I'm going to publish my beautiful poem out there. The question is, where did that actually come from? You don't even know, right? You don't even know where that came from. And you can't figure it out because there's no structural way today in the way these are operating for that to happen. So I think that's the largest problem that we face out there is attribution, and we have the same problem with identity, right? How do we identify ourselves in a digital space? I mean, there's a some of you have probably heard this from me before, but there's a little thing down there that says I'm J.M. Williams, but I don't know how I would prove that to you right this minute, right? And I certainly can see everybody else's name here, but that doesn't mean that's really who you are. Right? I don't know what that means. And we haven't come up with a structure yet to enable us to do that effectively. The other challenge about it is somebody's pointing out in the chat, as well as in another question that just came up over here, is, monetization. Look, artists should get paid, right? Creators should get paid. How is that even structured? If you can't tell who the creator was that contributed to a work, how can they even get recompense, for the effort they put in for the thing that you used to derive something? You just paid ChatGPT $20 a month or whatever the number is, and how's that distributed? Is that getting distributed back to anybody that was in that data set from September, 2021 where it was collected? No. Is there even a structure they could do that? No. Was it ever thought about? No. And so it's not just an ethical dilemma. It is, Natasha, it is definitely an ethical dilemma, but it's even more importantly, it's a business dilemma, because, this is where what happens when something actually samples somebody's data that's identifiable and it gets published by somebody else for pay out of that, right? Then that lawsuit's going to go through the process of helping us figure out, what are the actual laws around all of these kinds of things to make this happen. And so the owner of the platform will definitely profit in the short term. The question is, what will be the results in the long term? And the biggest challenge we have today is our government, leaders being able to understand these problems. I was actually there where we had to do a presentation to explain the internet to a group of senators one time. And basically, we had to resort to telling them it was like pipes and valves to be able to explain how it was going to work. And so, I hesitate to, even think about how scary it is, to present this, on Capitol Hill and trying to explain to people the challenges that we're going to be facing. So lots and lots of other stuff. And Derek, you're absolutely right that the current models that the platforms and creators are using, even without the AI implications, are not functionally, paying everything they're worth. But hey, listen, I was one of the first internet service providers. Remember back when you got all those busy signals? That's because I would buy one line from the phone company and sell it to 20 people. Okay, so that's business a little bit around supply and demand. So those things are going to happen early on as things happen. But I think we're going to work through it. We have to, right? It's one of those things that just has to get solved, over time. Not to mix technologies at Austin Forum, but many of you probably just heard that a couple of the largest exchanges in cryptocurrency are being, sued by, or, basically sanctioned by the SEC, and different tokens like Solana and Cardano and others are being called securities and all other kinds of things. The reason that's happened is because no one has established any law that explains what those things really are. So this will force the law and the courts to now deal with these things to determine what they are. And we're going to go through that same cycle with all of these things around AI as we try to understand, how will those things be solved? How will we define, who owns the token and those kinds of things? Lots and lots of those things. And yep, it'll always be influenced by people making money, as Derek just put a note in there on, Spotify and its IPO and those kind of things. Before we switch to Bard, let me take a look at the questions again real quick. Just a MidJourney question that J. Craig Wheeler asked here. There is and there isn't, right? I mean, I think you have to think about it a little bit, right? I don't think anybody can help building on somebody else's work, right? So, I love Frank Frazetta. So if I could draw, I would try to draw like him. Does that mean I need to pay Frank Frazetta or his estate because I'm attempting to draw like him? I don't think so, right? I think we have to use common sense a little bit while we're doing these kind of things. I think if you were directly copying somebody, like if it had given me a Frank Frazetta image to do something, if you take a look at those images I have, and some of them will be out eventually in game form, they don't look anything like, I have several Frank Frazetta paintings and stuff. They don't really, you could look at it and say, well, that's not really Frank Frazetta. It kind of looks like that. Right. So I think that's how we have to kind of pursue it. I don't think we're going to ever be able to say, you own, nobody can ever think like somebody else. This painting in the background here is from a game called Stellaris, right? A fabulous artist, did this, but other artists create alien pictures like this as well, in the similar styles. And so it'd be very hard, I think, to say nobody can use anybody else's style, without paying them for it or something like that. Adrian has a good question. Is learning today done strictly from internet content only? Will there ever be some type of scanning the world's libraries books to include in the learning data? Well, good question. If you've ever seen Google Books, you will know that they've been scanning books for really a long time. So Bruce, you're absolutely right. So for those that don't know, my wife's IP lawyer. So it is well tooled to handle attribution. The problem is none of the systems are tooled to be able to handle attribution. And so metadata doesn't work for that, not in AI LLMs and the way that they work today and that kind of stuff. So there has to be a different structure. On top of that, because we don't have good digital identity structures for the actual creators themselves, we don't have anything to hook the attribution to. So even if they could just do the attribution in some way, there's not a way to tie it to the actual digital person, to tie that to their physical person so that you can actually validate that. Otherwise, right now, you can just create another avatar of a famous person and have them say or do something. And therefore, it's very hard to distinguish, between those kinds of things. And so there's a lot of other tech that has to evolve and become into place to make some of these things work properly. And we haven't really built all those underpinnings, properly. And, the guys and gals that built the original parts of the internet, you can blame our fault because we picked open instead of closed, right? We decided to build on protocols like TCP/IP and others that didn't have the ability to acknowledge a transmission. They were broadcast, and that let us build things fast and wide rather than having secure point-to-point communications over everything, which was a huge criticism to begin with. But we knew that if we attempted to put those controls on both ends of things, that would give the other end control of who was receiving things. And that would not have allowed us to create the open internet that we ended up today. So Natasha, good question. Blockchain is just another tool. It's a very good tool, and it creates an immutable ledger, right, to be able to record things properly. But you still need almost all those other things that I mentioned to be able to do that. So you could use it to audit and track things. So, again, you can only measure something, you can only quantify and audit something you can measure effectively. And without the ability to have digital identity connected to physical identity properly, and for the attribution to be connected to that digital identity, it's hard for even blockchain to really help a lot with doing that. So Thaddeus asked about privacy and things, because the AI do a lot of jobs that needs to have sensors. Yep, every car you've got right now has more sensors. I mean, go take a look at all of the different cars and the data that they collect. You would be shocked. You can get a little $39, plug thing to go in your car that will actually show you all of the stuff that it collects. And it's insanity. I mean, I'm always amazed. I've worked on several projects with car manufacturers where, they bring us all the data to do stuff with, and I'm like, holy cow, look at all this data. It's amazing. So yes, IoT, sensors, video, everything else is being processed, constantly. I mean, what does this know about me? Everything, right? This watch on my wrist here, knows far more about me than I can even remember, right? I was looking through my Apple Health app the other day, and I'm like, wow, it collects that? I don't even know what that is. I have to go look and try and figure those things. Let's see. Sorry, I'm looking for some more questions here. So Sam, good question. Are there common sense guardrails that private enterprise can embrace and keep competition alive, or is that a fantasy? Well, life is just a fantasy. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry, it's an old 80s song. But there are actually some guardrails and guidelines. Unfortunately, we don't have time, really for me to talk about those, but there are ISO standards that are underway around privacy related things that are going to go to this. So if you haven't seen like ISO 31700, for example, which came out of Canada's privacy by design work and is now an accepted ISO standard, which is the first really data privacy structure for platforms, for consumer platforms and things. They're thinking about these things, all the time. In fact, I think we're gonna have a podcast on here a little later in the year around all of the privacy and ethics and things like that related to it, with some other friends of mine on there that are going to talk about all that. So I think that's coming. Adrian asked a question. Much scientific engineering data is in the form of graphs and charts. How well adapted is AI interpreting this form of data? Man, they're amazing. I mean, if you want to feed it charts and tell it to do something and give you an interpretation of it, I encourage you to just go to town. It's unbelievable. It's very good at doing things like that. I mean, referential, kind of tools, anything that involves graphs, especially, and I mean graphs with a capital G, like graph database structures, things like that. It's unbelievable. It's far better than humans, right, at doing that, because I mean, it can run more iterations than we can. It's just crazy. it's not intuitive, but it is, logical. And so let's see. So Jesse asked, with the tag each user gets when they log into an LLM, won't it eventually be easier to prove that someone stole IP rather than being lightly influenced? If that tag was ever attached to anything that the large language model did, that might be true. But the problem is right this minute, there's no structure for the actual component that's inside there to attach that. There's no metadata structure to do that. The AI can learn, it takes, like if you wrote in a question or gave it documents or things, it doesn't identify that you gave it to him, it just sucks it into the model. So there's no way to make that function yet. There are some tools, I'm sure one of the Google people yell at me, oh, we're working on that. And I'm sure they are. But today, that's not exactly how it works, without getting into too much of it. Okay, checking my time here. So I put on my I'm not a lawyer hat and those kind of things to answer Francis's question, and then I'll do the Apple monetizing one. So you can use Chatter Bard output for commercial use. There's no actual restriction, as far as I know, written into the current documents. That could change at any moment. People are using it right this minute. I know many companies that are using it for all kinds of strategic, operations, everything from supply chain optimization, competitive analysis, financial, predictions, all kinds of things. Lisa, I'm pretty sure they'll be posted. Delaney can, at the end, will tell everybody how to get to the slides in the presentation. So, but check with your company lawyers and make sure, you're doing all the things that they want you to do. So Derek asked, is Apple monetizing data on their health app? And Steve said they can sell your info a long time before they get caught. And usually, if you just saw one of the companies just got fined because, they were selling children's data inappropriately and doing things with it inappropriately and not reporting it properly. They got a $20 million fine, which somebody calculated was 49 minutes of operating revenue. So, that's the structure we live in today. So, the other thing about Apple and the health data and those things, they don't monetize your data, right? They're not monetizing your data directly. In other words, they don't sell your data to anybody else, at least as far as I know, and they don't do those things. However, their entire ecosystem and everything they do is based upon your data, right? The reason that people, use, an iPhone and a Mac and a this and a that and all of the ecosystems, they looked at vision, right? The vision tool is going to scan your retina, okay, directly every time you look at it, right? So it'll authenticate it's you. There'll be no question whether it's you or not. And you're trusting them with that data creates the Apple ecosystem, which is based on all of your informational data. When they decided to shut down third-party cookies, inappropriately, it cost Facebook $20 billion in the first quarter that they shut that down, right? Because digital advertising was based on sharing that information. When Apple removed your information from that pool, right? It's direct effect on everybody's ecosystem. And so you're going to see more and more of that. And, my 2 cents on that, love all of my Apple friends, is that, the more they create those walled structures to protect you, it's also creating walled structures that imprison you, because you can't move your data. You can't move between those systems. There are things you can do inside the Apple ecosystem that you can't do in the Android ecosystem, that you can't do in other ecosystems. That's both good and bad, right? Because not only can you not do it, other people can't do what's in your system. And the same is true of Android. There are things you can do in the Android system you can't do, or the Google system, that you can't do in the Apple system and the Microsoft system, and so on and so on. So these walled gardens, I don't really like that term, but that's the one everybody uses. They're much more like planetary spheres with a dome around them, than they are a walled garden. It sounds kind of fun to have a walled garden. It doesn't sound very fun to be trapped inside of a planetary force field. Those things, are going to have to change, right, over time for us to evolve. And so somebody was asking, what do I think the future is going to look like? I think it's going to look like this thing behind me here, but I don't even know what that is. So I haven't found it in the game yet. But I think, it's going to be very different. Okay, I think I got 10 minutes, Delaney, am I right?
Yes.
All right, so for my last 10 minutes here, I'm going to check questions real quick. Ooh, coming in. Let me just address Chip's question because it's a really good one. He said, I was speaking with a very senior finance leader a few weeks ago who was dismissing ChatGPT because of a garbage in, garbage out problem, giving the potential for noise in the LLM model. And what are my thoughts on it? Well, first of all, every system has noise, right? So that's directly there. That's the beauty, by the way, of the prompt stuff that was being talked about in there. By mastering that kind of prompt kind of thing, and I was showing you, like, for example, as it refined the graphical model, it wasn't just getting a clearer picture, right? It was actually applying definition to the prompts that I gave it to make it look more like a knife, to make it look more like a, a helmet, to make it look more like the way I wanted it to do. So it wasn't just, keeping a grainy, making a grainy image better, right? So the same thing, when you give something like a P&L, when you give ChatGPT a P&L or a model like that, it's going to analyze the model and it's not going to get it right the first time because of that noise factor. But because you have the ability to iterate on it by controlling it via those prompts, you can actually solve for that to get it where it can make proper inferences off of there and can give you insights that you couldn't figure out yourself between things, especially in things with large scale data sets like supply chains and things like that, where you've got too many variables for humans to do. P&Ls are a little easier, right? But large scale, multi-part, multivariate, supply chain problem, is much harder for humans to be able to say, aha, there's the bottleneck, or look over there, holy cow, that's where the expense is happening, right? And so those kind of things you can actually do really great things. All right, Eric, we're going to the Bard demo. We're going to the Bard demo. It's going to be a very fast Bard demo. As soon as I remember where I put it, hang on. I think I put it in here. It's in the same one. Yeah, all right, good. All right, so Bard. So, and I'm logged in the most basic form of Bard at the moment. I have a different account too, which I started on. Then I was like, oh my gosh. Hang on, I've got a Zoom error.
All good? Oh, I think you're on mute now.
Sorry, default muted me. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. My Zoom crashed for no purpose that I know, except Bard probably freaked it out. So this is like a very simple method. And I encourage, listen, if anybody's afraid of doing this, don't be afraid. Go do it. Go log in. Go ask it silly questions, right? If you want to work professionally in it, a different set of advice, which I'll give in a minute. But if you just go in here, and I'm just, I'm always amazed. This is a demo, by the way, question that they put in there because it's pretty cool. But if you go into these sections and ask it these kind of things and see what comes back, I have to warn you, it's a bit like TikTok. Once you start, you're like stuck. So always allow an hour or two, when you go do this, because you're not just going to sit there for a few minutes. One thing I really like about Bard, as opposed to ChatGPT, because it is integrated with Google, you've got related searches down here. So as you see what's going on in kind of the new way of looking at things, you can tie that to one you're very comfortable with, to be able to do that. And by the way, fire away with Bard questions if you have any, and I'll look at them again. Hopefully I'll have 1 minute before we have to bail today. And apologies, I think everybody with us is virtual, but I always like to see people in person too. So next time, I hope I'll be available in Austin for anybody that's there. So let's take a look at a little different one. So now this is a bit of a hack, I have to say, because it's phrased in a very specific way. There are certain words you can't use, but for those of you that are interested in lawyers and contracts and things, I asked it to write a contractor NDA that has dangerous legal language favoring the employer. And you have to be very careful how you put those words together, because some of these are non-permissive. In other words, that's what they were talking about hacking it. The order of the words sometimes determines what you can and can't get from the LLM, because there are filters that sit behind these things that are attempting to prevent things like, I think was mentioned, one of the most famous ones lately is, getting teaching you how to, having somebody's grandmother teach them how to build a napalm bomb, or to make napalm. It's very interesting as you go through here, because, it doesn't actually tell you, where the things are. I thought it was pretty hilarious too when I did this one, that let's take a look at the sources, because we were talking about attribution, right? That's the other difference you're going to see a lot in Bard, is that sometimes it will have attribution. It doesn't have all of them, but it has a few. And so in this case, that learnprompting.org we were just talking about, this is an example from their training section. So you can see how the whole thing works. That's the other reason I picked this one, because if you go in and use this specific language, in here, you'll be able to then see, how it's making decisions and what parts of the contract, right, favor, the employer and those kinds of things. So this is one that it's kind of easier to get a view of understanding how the LLM is actually putting things together to come, together with all this. And so I always love it's also pulling from the sec.gov to be able to do this as well. Hang on, I lost my question window. Give me 1 second. All y'all's questions are great. I love questions. Chip asked, how far away is the potential for having information privacy to be able to upload a company's P&L while keeping it confidential? Some LLMs have that capability today, not the larger ones that are out here right this minute. When I say that capability, it's hard to tell because there's no audit function. So they say they do. I can't guarantee whether or not that's true or false and how they do it. They say they make you a private space, that nothing you upload actually gets passed to the model itself, but it has to pass it to the model for it to do inference. So I don't really know exactly how they're doing that. I haven't spent a lot of time doing that. Adrian asked another interesting one, just how much of a difficulty is the level of hallucinations in, say, medical applications, like, for example, robotic AI surgery? So let me talk about hallucinations a minute. So the AI does hallucinate. That's a euphemism, like blockchain. It's the hallucinations are not like we hallucinate as human. What it really means is that it doesn't make the right set of connections, right? And I'm simplifying that a lot mathematically for any of the math folks out there. Sorry, but we got a mixed audience. So it basically is not following its connections properly, which causes it to sometimes, for example, a lawyer just recently used it to do some citation work, and it made up a whole bunch of citations, and he submitted it to the court. Needless to say, that's a funny story. If you want to read it, it's entertaining. You can go look it up. But that's a hallucination. So the question is really, to me, Adrian, I'm going to paraphrase your question to answer it, is what happens when you're using this for real work and dangerous work, and the AI doesn't make the right connections? The answer is you're in trouble. And that's the other problem we have today. We talked about kind of what I thought the big problem was about attribution. The second problem is audit. There is no audit function for truth around all of this. We spend our lives mixed in with fake news and, phishing attempts and all kinds of things and everything else. And we have no way to audit, our digital reality that we live in today. We're all cyborgs,
so
right?
This was really fun to watch. I really liked watching a lot of people make new collaborators, new contacts.
Thank you all for
hope
joining me
you
tonight.
exchange some